The millionaire demands obedience, but she responds with elegance. When he says, "You must satisfy me," the atmosphere changes instantly. She awakens deep jealousy in the man who thought he had everything, and nothing prepares you for what he does when he loses control. What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The December chill arrived early in Aspen, wrapping the town in a mist that seemed to want to hide ancient secrets. Christmas lights already adorned the downtown streets, reflecting in shop windows and on the hurried faces of tourists who came seeking the European charm of the Rocky Mountain region. But far from the hustle and bustle, in the upper part of town where mansions rose imposingly among ancient pines, one house remained closed as it always had. There lived Augustus Sterling, a man who carried on his shoulders not only the weight of an inherited fortune, but also the burden of a solitude he himself had cultivated over the years. Augustus was 42, but his gaze betrayed a much older age. It wasn't just his elegant posture or the grey hairs beginning to dominate his temples. It was something deeper, an exhaustion of the soul that was apparent in every restrained gesture, in every prolonged silence. The only son of a traditional East Coast family, he had grown up surrounded by privileges that never brought him true joy. His parents, though physically present, were so absorbed by business and social commitments that they barely noticed the loneliness of the boy who wandered alone through the corridors of that same mansion. When he was still young, he lost his father in circumstances he preferred not to recall. His mother, devastated, withdrew from the world a few years later, leaving him under the guardianship of a distant uncle who saw in his nephew only an extension of the family's assets. Uncle Marcus, a ruthless businessman with a heart hardened by pragmatism, taught Augustus that trust was a dangerous luxury. For years, Augustus lived with the certainty that every person around him had a price, an interest, a hidden agenda. When his uncle passed away 3 years ago, he left behind not only a considerable inheritance but also a will, filled with clauses and conditions that seemed designed to perpetuate the same bitterness that had consumed his own life. Augustus inherited everything, but at the cost of losing any illusion he might still harbor about genuine human connections. Since then, he had lived reclusively. The mansion, with its 15 rooms and sprawling gardens, had become a gilded cage. He kept only 3 permanent staff members: Mrs. Eleanor, the cook who had been there even before he was born; Joshua, the gardener who tended the grounds with silent dedication; and Mr. Damien, the butler, who had served the family for over 30 years. They were not just employees, they were witnesses to a life slowly consuming itself like a candle forgotten in an empty room. Mr. Damien observed everything with the patience of someone who understands without judging. A 65-year-old man with completely white hair and hands calloused by work, he possessed a wisdom that came from a life lived with dignity. Unlike Augustus, he had known love, raised 3 children who now had their own families, and knew the value of a sincere hug, a shared meal, a word spoken at the right moment. He saw in his employer not a cruel man, but someone deeply wounded, someone who had built such high walls around his heart that he no longer knew how to tear them down. That year, just a few days before Christmas, Mr. Damien made a decision he had never dared to make before. Tired of seeing Augustus languish in self-imposed solitude, without consulting anyone, he ordered 50 simple invitations from a print shop downtown. They were not elaborate or luxurious cards. Cream paper, black lettering, no identified sender. The message was direct and mysterious. If you come, something in your life will change. On the back, only the mansion's address and the date, December 24th, 7 o'clock in the evening. For a week, Mr. Damien cycled through Aspen, leaving the invitations in strategic places. Some were placed in mailboxes in modest districts, others left on park benches. A few handed directly to people who seemed to carry in their eyes the same emptiness he recognized in his employer. He didn't expect everyone to come. In fact, he didn't expect anyone to come. But he had to try. He had to believe that there was still someone in the world capable of seeing beyond appearances, someone willing to risk the unknown. Most of the invitations were ignored or discarded, Some suspected a scam, others laughed at the message's naivete. In a tourist town like Aspen, there was no shortage of stories of fraud disguised as opportunity. But a single invitation found its destiny. It ended up in the hands of Marina Smith, a 21-year-old woman who lived in a small apartment at the back of a boarding house in Willow Creek, a more modest district on the outskirts of Aspen. Marina worked as an attendant at a neighborhood bakery, waking up at 5 every morning to open the establishment before the first customers arrived. It was a tough routine, earning her just enough to pay the rent and ensure basic meals. She had no close family. Her mother, who had raised her alone, passed away when Marina was 16, taken by an illness that progressed too quickly for them to prepare. She had never known her father. She grew up hearing that he had left even before she was born, and Marina learned early on not to ask questions about what had no answers. In recent years, she had built a small but dignified life. She had few friends, no boyfriend, and spent holidays alone, usually working to earn extra money. Christmas was especially difficult. She saw families gathered, children running through the streets in new clothes, couples holding hands in front of illuminated shop windows, and felt a tightness in her chest that she preferred to ignore. It wasn't envy, but a deep melancholy, the feeling of always being on the outside, looking through a window at a world to which she didn't belong. The invitation reached her by chance, or perhaps by something greater than chance. She was returning from work on a cold December afternoon when she saw the envelope lying on the sidewalk in front of the boarding house gate. She could have walked past it, but something made her stop. She picked up the paper, noticing it was clean, with no dirt marks despite being on the ground. She opened it and read the simple message: "If you come, something in your life will change." On the back, an address she vaguely recognized as being from the upper part of town, where the mansions of important people were located. Her first reaction was distrust. It seemed like a scheme, but reading it, again she realized there was no promise of money, a job or a prize. Just that enigmatic sentence and an invitation to appear on Christmas Eve. Marina put the paper in her coat pocket and went home, but all night she couldn't stop thinking about it. Something in the simplicity of the message touched a part of her that still dared to hope. Perhaps it was naivete, perhaps necessity, but within Marina there was a stubborn spark that refused to die even after so many years of solitude. Over the next few days, she found herself taking the invitation out of her pocket dozens of times, reading and rereading it as if the words would reveal some hidden meaning. She discreetly asked at the bakery if anyone else had received something similar, but no one knew anything. She thought about throwing it away, forgetting that foolishness. But on December 23rd, while serving a customer who was complaining about the price of the Christmas cake, she made a decision. She would go. If it was a scam, she would return immediately. If it was some cruel joke, at least she would have tried. But if there was a chance, however small, that the sentence was true, she couldn't forgive herself for letting it pass. On the afternoon of the 24th, Marina finished her shift early, thanks to the kindness of the bakery owner. She went home, took a long bath, and put on the only outfit she considered presentable: dark jeans, a long-sleeved beige blouse, and a grey wool coat she had bought at a thrift store. She had no elegant shoes, just worn sneakers that she carefully cleaned. She tied her brown hair in a simple ponytail, applied a discreet lipstick she almost never used, and looked at herself in the mirror with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She took the bus that climbed the mountain road towards the affluent neighborhoods. The journey lasted almost 40 minutes, winding through narrow, curving streets. Marina held the crumpled invitation in her hands, reading the address for the 10th time. When the bus stopped at the nearest point, she got off with trembling legs. The cold was more intense up there, and the mist began to descend with the arrival of night. She walked for about 15 minutes, passing large lit-up houses from which sounds of music and laughter emanated. With each step, she questioned whether she wasn't making a terrible mistake. Finally, she arrived at the indicated address. A tall, imposing wrought-iron gate marked the entrance to a property that stretched beyond what her eyes could reach in the darkness. Through the bars, she saw the silhouette of an enormous mansion, with lights on in some windows and an illuminated Christmas tree visible through a large glass pane. Marina took a deep breath, pressed the intercom, and waited. The voice that answered was deep and gentle, with an accent that betrayed a rural origin. "Good evening. Who's speaking?" Marina swallowed hard. "Good evening. My name is Marina. I received an invitation to come here today." There was a pause on the other side, followed by a sound of contained surprise. "One moment, please." The intercom fell silent, and Marina stood there, hugging herself against the cold, wondering if she shouldn't simply leave before it was too late. The gate opened with a soft creak, and Marina saw the figure of an elderly man walking towards her, wearing a dark suit and an expression that mixed joy and disbelief. It was Mr. Damien, and his eyes shone with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Miss, you actually came," he said. His voice choked. "Please, come in. Come in." Marina stepped through the gate, feeling the cobblestone path under her feet as she followed the man towards the main entrance. The mansion was even more impressive up close. 3 floors of architecture that blended classical and modern elements with wide balconies and enormous windows. The garden, even in the dead of winter, showed meticulous care, with pruned shrubs and paths illuminated by small embedded lights. Marina felt completely out of place, like an intruder invading a world that didn't belong to her. Mr. Damien led her to the main door, but before opening it he turned to her with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something, miss. The owner of the house doesn't know about the invitations. I sent them myself on my own initiative. He is a good man but very lonely, and I thought perhaps a gesture like this could help him. If you wish to leave, I will perfectly understand. But if you stay, I only ask that you be patient with him." Marina processed those words, realizing the situation was even stranger than she had imagined. But something in the sincerity of that elderly man prevented her from fleeing. She nodded, and Mr. Damien smiled gratefully before opening the door. The interior of the mansion was breathtaking, a spacious hall with soaring high ceilings, polished marble floor, an imposing staircase curving up to the 2nd floor. To the left, through open double doors, Marina saw an enormous living room, with furniture that seemed to have come straight out of a decor magazine. But what caught her attention most was the Christmas tree. Gigantic, almost touching the ceiling, adorned with golden and silver ornaments, softly blinking lights, and a gleaming star at the top. Below it, a long table was set with excessive refinement. White tablecloths, fine china, crystal goblets, and an absurd amount of food for just one person. It was then that she saw him. Augustus Sterling stood near the window, his back to her, looking out at the darkened garden. He wore dark dress trousers and a simple white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, in a casual elegance that bespoke habit. When Mr. Damien cleared his throat softly, he turned and Marina felt the impact of that gaze. His eyes were a greyish, blue, deep and tired, seemingly carrying too many stories for one lifetime. His face was marked by aristocratic features, a defined jawline, and an expression that alternated between surprise and confusion. "Mr. Sterling?" Mr. Damien began, his voice firm despite his visible nervousness. "This is Miss Marina. She received an invitation for tonight's dinner." Augustus frowned, alternating his gaze between the butler and the young woman standing in the middle of his living room, clearly uncomfortable. "Invitation? What invitation? I didn't send any invitation." Marina felt her face burn with shame, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her. She pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket and held it out to him with a trembling hand. "It's this. I thought it was serious. I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll leave." But before she could turn, Augustus stepped forward, taking the invitation from her hands. He read it quickly, and an expression of understanding mixed with what seemed like irritation crossed his face. He looked at Mr. Damien severely. "You did this?" The butler did not lower his eyes, facing his employer with dignity. "Yes, sir. I sent 50 invitations around town. Miss Marina was the only one brave. Enough to come. And if you are going to dismiss me for it, I accept, but I do not regret it." The silence that followed was heavy, tense. Marina didn't know where to put her hands, where to rest her eyes. Augustus continued to hold the invitation, his jaw tight, clearly processing the situation. Finally, he let out a long sigh and ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of exasperation. He looked at Marina again, and this time his gaze was different, less harsh, as if he were seeing her for the first time. He noticed her. Simple coat, her worn sneakers, the way she held the strap of her old bag as if it were a lifeline. He also noticed the dignity with which she maintained her upright posture, despite the embarrassment, and something in that touched him in a way he hadn't expected. "How many people came?" Augustus asked Mr. Damien, his voice softer. "Only Miss Marina, sir." Augustus looked around at the table set for 50 people, at the absurd amount of food, at the evident effort that had gone into a dinner that now turned out to have only one guest. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. 50 invitations and one person. That says a lot about the world, don't you think? He turned to Marina, and for the first time his eyes met hers directly. Or perhaps it says a lot about you. What makes a young woman accept an anonymous invitation and come alone to a stranger's house on Christmas Eve? Marina felt the provocation in the question, but also genuine curiosity. She took a deep breath before answering, deciding that since she was already there, it wouldn't hurt to be honest. Perhaps the same thing that makes a rich man live alone in an enormous mansion: loneliness. The answer fell like a stone into a quiet lake, creating ripples that spread through the silence of the room. Augustus blinked, clearly not expecting that. For a moment, something crossed his face, a shadow of recognition, of shared pain. Then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, a tired smile appeared on his lips. "Touché," he said, and the word sounded almost like a surrender. He looked at Mr. Damien, who was waiting anxiously. Since you prepared this entire dinner, it would be a waste to let her leave, and since Miss Marina had the courage that 50 people didn't, it would be rude to send her away. He made an elegant gesture towards the table. "Please, sit down. Let's have dinner." Marina hesitated, but Mr. Damien smiled encouragingly, and she felt that refusing would be even stranger than accepting. She walked to the table, choosing a chair near the head, and sat down carefully, as if the furniture might break under her weight. Augustus sat at the head, maintaining a respectful distance, and Mr. Damien began to serve. The dinner was bountiful: roasted turkey, elaborate stuffing, rice with nuts, various salads, savory, pies, and an infinity of side dishes that Marina barely recognized. At her home, Christmas meant a simple roasted chicken when there was money, or a regular meal when there wasn't. The first few minutes passed in awkward silence. Marina didn't know which cutlery to use, and Augustus pretended not to notice her insecurity. Mr. Damien circulated discreetly, serving wine, offering bread, creating a forced normalcy in that absurd situation. It was Augustus who finally broke the silence. "So, Marina, that's your name, right?" She nodded, swallowing a piece of turkey that seemed reluctant to go down. "Tell me about yourself. What do you do? Where do you live? Do you have family?" The questions were direct, almost clinical, but Marina detected in them a genuine, albeit clumsy, curiosity. "I work at a bakery. I live alone in a small apartment in Willow Creek. I don't have family. My mother passed away a few years ago. I never knew my father." She spoke objectively, trying to keep emotion out of her voice, but some words came out heavier than others, revealing old wounds. Augustus watched her as she spoke, and Marina noticed that he really listened, not just heard. There was a tension in those tired eyes, as if each piece of information was being carefully filed away. "And what made you accept the invitation?" he asked, his voice softer now. Marina put her fork aside, gripping the wineglass with both hands, just to have something to hold on to. "I don't know exactly. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps hope, or perhaps I was just tired of spending Christmas alone once again." The raw honesty of the answer caught Augustus off guard. He lowered his eyes to his own plate, idly stirring his food. "I understand," he said simply. And there was so much weight in those two words that Marina realized he truly understood. Augustus leaned back in his chair, picking up his wineglass and swirling it slowly, watching the red liquid reflect the candlelight. "You know, Marina, I've spent the last 10 Christmases alone. Not for lack of invitations. People invite me, always invite me. Parties, dinners, charity events disguised as gatherings, but they all want something. They want to be seen with me, they want access to my bank account. They want to network, as they say. No one truly wants my company, they want what I represent. He took a long sip. So I stopped going. I stopped pretending that was human connection. Marina listened in silence, realizing this was more than just a dinner conversation. It was a confession, a catharsis he probably hadn't had in years. But it wasn't always like this, Augustus continued, his gaze distant as if seeing the past projected on the wall in front of him. When I was a child, this house was full. My parents hosted huge parties. Important people came, politicians, businessmen, artists. I would hide at the top of the stairs watching everything, thinking that was what it meant to have a family. But it was all a performance. My parents barely spoke to me. I had nannies, private tutors, drivers. I had everything except true attention. He paused, and Marina saw pain cross his face like a cloud darkening the sun. My father passed away when I was 15. My mother completely shut down after that. She was there, but she wasn't. You understand? Physically present, emotionally absent. When she also passed, I was placed under the guardianship of my uncle Marcus. He was pragmatic, cold, calculating. He taught me that the world is made of transactions, that trust is a weakness, that love is an illusion people use to get what they want. He drank more wine. And you know what? For years, I believed it. I lived as he taught. I kept people at a distance, treated relationships as contracts, protected my heart as if it were an invincible fortress. He looked directly at Marina, and there was a vulnerability in that gaze that completely contrasted with the controlled posture of the rest of his body. Until one day I woke up and realized I was completely alone. I had no friends, no one to share a meal with, no one who cared if I was well or not. I had money, I had properties, I had power, but I had no life. He laughed humorlessly. Ironic, isn't it? I spent so much time protecting my heart that I ended up imprisoning it in a place where no one else can reach it. Not even me. Marina felt a pang in her chest, recognizing in his words the same pain she carried. I understand, she said softly. I built walls too. Not for the same reasons as you, but I built them. When my mother passed, I promised myself I would never again allow myself to depend on anyone. Never again let someone get so close that their departure could destroy me. So I lived a controlled, measured life, always keeping my distance. I worked, went home, slept, woke up, repeated. Without getting involved, without taking risks, without giving myself away. She swallowed a lump in her throat. But deep down, I think I always knew that wasn't life. It was survival. And I'm tired of just surviving. Marina's words echoed in the room like a bell ringing uncomfortable truths. Augustus remained silent for a long moment, processing that confession that so perfectly mirrored his own. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he felt seen. Not judged, not analyzed, not measured by the size of his bank account or the importance of his surname. Just seen as a wounded human being trying to find his way back to humanity. Mr. Damien, who had remained discreet throughout the conversation, serving and collecting plates with silent movements, allowed himself a subtle smile. That fragile but real connection beginning to form between two equally wounded people was exactly what he had hoped for when he sent those invitations. It didn't matter that only one person had come. What mattered was that it was the right person. Dinner continued, but now with a different atmosphere. Conversations became lighter, interspersed with stories from the past. Augustus spoke of trips he had taken alone, exotic places he had visited without ever truly being present in them. Marina shared memories of her mother, simple stories but laden with genuine love. Gradually, the two discovered improbable common ground. Both enjoyed reading, especially classic novels. Both appreciated music, although Augustus played the piano and Marina only listened. Both had a fascination with cold nights and rain, with the sounds that winter brought. When they finished the main meal, Mr. Damien brought dessert: French toast, chocolate trifle, vanilla pudding, donuts, and a fragrant walnut cake. Marina tasted a little of everything, marveling at flavors she had never experienced in such refined versions. Augustus, observing her genuine delight, felt something stir within him, something warm and forgotten. Perhaps it was just a longing for a time when he too could find pleasure in simple things. Outside the mansion, the weather began to change. The wind had increased in intensity, bringing with it the characteristic smell of imminent rain. Augustus noticed it first, frowning as he looked out the window. "A storm is coming," he said, more to himself than to Marina. She also looked, noticing how the sky had completely darkened and the garden trees bent under the force of the wind. "I need to leave before it gets worse," she said, getting up reluctantly. The truth was, she didn't want to go. That night, however strange it had been, was the first time in years she hadn't felt completely alone. Augustus also stood up, but there was a hesitation in his movements. The drive down the mountain road is dangerous in a storm. The streets get slippery and there isn't adequate lighting in many sections. He looked at her with a concern that surprised both of them. "You can stay. We have plenty of rooms. I can ask Mrs. Eleanor to prepare one for you. Tomorrow morning, when it passes, I can ask Joshua to drive you home safely." The offer, though practical, carried a weight beyond logistics. It was an invitation to prolong that improbable encounter, not to end the fragile connection that had begun to form. Marina knew this, and precisely because she knew, she hesitated. Accepting meant trusting, meant letting down her guard, meant allowing herself to believe, if only for one night, that the world could be different from what it had always been. Outside, the first thunder echoed loud and close, making the windows vibrate. The decision was made not by reason, but by circumstance. Marina nodded slowly. "If it's no trouble," she said, and Augustus shook his head. "No trouble at all. In fact," and here he paused as if the words were difficult to pronounce, "it's been the best company I've had in years." The mutual recognition of that simple truth hung between them like a fragile bridge over a deep abyss. Two strangers, united by loneliness and separated by different worlds, were beginning to discover that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something beyond the walls each had built around their own heart. Mr. Damien led Marina to the second floor of the mansion, down a wide corridor where old paintings adorned the walls. Most depicted bucolic landscapes or portraits of people Marina imagined to be ancestors of the Sterling family. There was something melancholic in those painted faces, a seriousness that seemed to traverse generations, as if the weight of solitude was an inheritance as valuable as money and property. The room prepared for her was at the end of the corridor, with a finely carved noble wood door. When Mr. Damien opened it, Marina had to suppress an exclamation of surprise. The room was larger than her entire apartment. A king-size canopy bed occupied the center, covered with impeccable white sheets and a hand-embroidered quilt. There was an antique dresser, a two-door wardrobe, a reading armchair by the window, and a side door leading to a private bathroom. Everything exuded discreet elegance, as if each object had been carefully chosen over decades. "You'll find clean clothes in the wardrobe, miss," Mr. Damien said gently. "They belong to old guests who never returned for them. Perhaps some will fit. If you need anything, just ring this bell." He pointed to a small silver bell on the bedside table. "But please don't hesitate to move around the house if you can't sleep. Mr. Sterling often walks around at night. You'll hardly find the doors locked." Marina thanked him with a nod, still processing that surreal situation. When she was alone, she sat on the edge of the bed, sinking into the soft mattress, and let out a long sigh. She looked around, touching the fine fabric of the quilt with her fingers, trying to believe she was there, in that place that seemed to belong to another reality. She remembered her cramped little room, with peeling walls and a thin mattress on a creaky bed. She remembered nights when the cold seeped through the poorly sealed window cracks, and how she bundled herself in old blankets, trying to warm her body and heart. She got up and opened the wardrobe out of curiosity. Inside, she found some carefully hung women's clothes, simple but elegant dresses, blouses of fine fabrics, well-cut trousers. She picked up a cream silk pajama and brought it to her face, feeling the softness of the fabric. She had never worn anything like it. In the bathroom, she discovered plush towels, sophisticated bath products, and a mirror that covered the entire wall. She took a long bath, letting the hot water wash away some of the tension she carried on her shoulders, and put on the pajamas, which were a little loose but comfortable. She lay down on the bed, turned off the light, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Outside, the storm had truly begun. Rain lashed hard against the windows, and the wind howled through the garden trees. It was a sound both terrifying and comforting. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop. She thought of Augustus, that man with tired eyes who carried a pain so similar to her own. She thought of the words they had exchanged during dinner, of the raw honesty they both displayed. She thought of Mr. Damien and his silent courage in sending those invitations. She thought of how strange life could be, leading two completely different people to the same place on the same night, as if some greater force were orchestrating that encounter. But sleep wouldn't come. After almost an hour of tossing and turning, Marina gave up. She got up, put on the simple slippers she had brought, and quietly left the room. The corridor was bathed in a soft gloom, illuminated only by small emergency lights embedded in the walls. She descended the staircase slowly, attentive to each step, holding on to the polished mahogany handrail. The house was silent, except for the sounds of the storm outside and the distant ticking of a wall clock. When she reached the ground floor, she was drawn by the soft light coming from the living room. She approached cautiously and saw Augustus there, sitting on the floor in front of the Christmas tree, his back against the sofa. He wore dark sweatpants and a simple grey t-shirt, very different from the formal elegance he had displayed earlier. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he held a glass of wine in his hand, staring fixedly at the illuminated tree, as if a film only he could see was projected there. Marina stood at the entrance, unsure whether to announce her presence or discreetly return to her room, but Augustus spoke without taking his eyes off the tree, as if he had known she was there all along. "Can't sleep either." His voice was soft, without the formal tone of before. Marina took a few steps into the room. "The sound of the rain woke me up, or maybe I never really slept." "Come sit," Augustus said, making a vague gesture towards the floor beside him. Marina hesitated for an instant, but then walked over and sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. The texture of the rug was soft under her legs, and the warmth of the lit fireplace on the other side of the room created a cozy atmosphere. They remained silent for a few minutes, just watching the tree lights blink in a hypnotic rhythm. "I used to love Christmas as a child," Augustus said suddenly, his voice laden with nostalgia. "Not for the presents or the food, but because, back then, my parents pretended to be a real family. For a few days they stopped arguing, they smiled, played music, laughed together. It was all an act, of course. I realized that when I got older. But at that moment, for the boy I was, it seemed real. It seemed like we were happy." He took a sip of wine. "After my father passed, my mother never put up a Christmas tree again. She said she saw no point, that they were just empty objects celebrating a commercial lie. Maybe she was right, but I missed those comforting lies." Marina looked at the tree, at the carefully chosen and perfectly arranged ornaments. "So why did you put one up now?" Augustus laughed without humor. "Tradition, I suppose. Or stubbornness. Or perhaps it's my way of fighting with my mother's ghost, proving that I can still find some beauty in it, even if I'm alone." He paused. "Or at least I was alone. Until you showed up." There was something in the way he said that which made Marina's heart quicken slightly. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't seduction. It was just the recognition that her presence had changed something in the dynamic of that night, of that house, perhaps even of his life. Marina pulled her knees to her chest, hugging her own legs. "My mother loved Christmas," she said softly. "Even when we didn't have money for presents or an elaborate dinner, she always found a way to make the day special. We'd buy a small, cheap artificial tree and decorate it together. She kept an old cardboard box with ornaments she'd collected over the years. Some were handmade by her, others were thrift store finds. But each one had a story." Augustus turned his head to look at her, noticing the contained emotion in her voice. "Do you still have that box?" Marina shook her head negatively. "When she passed, I had to Get rid of almost everything. The apartment where we lived was rented and I couldn't afford it. I ended up donating most of my things. I only kept a few photos and one specific ornament she loved very much. Her voice grew even softer. It was a small glass ornament shaped like a bell with gold details on the edge. She said her own mother had given it to her when she was a child. But a few years ago it broke. I tried to glue it, but it never looked the same. I ended up losing it in one of my moves. Augustus remained quiet, processing those words. Then, slowly, he rose from the floor with a fluid movement and walked to the tree. Marina watched as he knelt near the base, where an old wooden box was partially hidden among the lower branches. He opened the box carefully and began to rummage through its contents. He took out some ornaments, examined others, until he stopped, holding something delicately in his hands. When he turned, Marina saw it was a small glass bell with gold details on the edge, almost identical to what she had described, except this one had a small crack at its base. "Like this one?" Augustus asked, his voice strangely tense. Marina stood up impulsively, walking towards him with wide eyes. She took the ornament from his hands and examined it closely, feeling the cold, delicate glass between her fingers. It was so similar that for an instant she thought it was the same. But it couldn't be. It would be too much of a coincidence. "It's practically identical," she said, her voice choked. "Where did you get it?" Augustus picked up the wooden box and sat on the sofa, gesturing for Marina to do the same. She obeyed, still holding the bell as if it were a fragile treasure. "This box belonged to my grandmother," Augustus explained, running his hand over the worn lid. "She lived in New York City, in an old neighborhood called Greenwich Village. She had a small shop for crafts and antiques. My father used to take me to visit her a few times a year. She was one of the few people who really paid attention to me. She played with me, told me stories, taught me useless but fascinating things like identifying birds by their song or making origami." He took the bell from Marina's hands and looked at it with affection. "Before she passed, she gave me this box full of Christmas ornaments. She said they were special, that they came from different places and times. This specific bell, she told me, was part of a limited series made by an Italian artisan in the 60s. Only 200 were produced, each slightly different from the other. She had bought 2 identical ones on a trip to Europe, but had sold one shortly before giving me the box. I always wondered who bought it." Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. "My mother also bought hers at an antique shop in New York City. She told me that story many times. It was one of the few presents she allowed herself to buy right after I was born. She said she went into the shop almost by chance, saw the bell and felt she had to have it." She looked at Augustus, her eyes shining with a mixture of astonishment and something bordering on reverence. "Do you think it could have been from your grandmother's shop?" Augustus remained silent, looking at the bell, then at Marina, and then at the bell again. The chances were infinitesimal, almost impossible. But there they were, 2 strangers who met by chance on Christmas Eve, discovering that their stories were connected by an invisible thread spanning decades. "I don't believe in destiny," Augustus said slowly, but his voice lacked conviction. "I always thought it was a way for people to justify coincidences and make sense of chaos. But this—" He paused, searching for the right words. "This feels bigger than coincidence." Marina returned the bell to the box with exaggerated care, as if fearing to break it. Her hands trembled slightly. "My mother used to say that some encounters are inevitable, that some people are destined to cross paths, no matter how long it takes or how many different roads they travel. I always thought it was her romanticism, her way of making sense of her own loneliness. But perhaps she knew something I didn't understand." Augustus observed Marina with a new intensity. The light from the Christmas tree cast soft shadows on her face, highlighting the delicacy of her features and the expression of vulnerability she could no longer conceal. Something was happening there, something that went beyond simple empathy or circumstantial companionship. It was a connection that seemed anchored in deeper layers, in intertwined stories that neither of them had consciously chosen, but which now united them inexplicably. "Want to know something strange?" Augustus said, leaning back on the sofa and looking at the ceiling. "All my life I was taught to distrust everything and everyone. to look at every situation for the angle, the hidden interest, the trap. And when you showed up here today, my first reaction was skepticism. I thought, what does she want? Why did she accept the invitation? What's the plan? But then you spoke and I realized there was no plan. You were here for the same reason I was preparing this whole dinner. Loneliness. And somehow, that completely disarmed me. Marina felt a lump in her throat. I was also suspicious at first. When I picked up the invitation, my first thought was that it was a scam. But something in me insisted it wasn't. Something told me that if I didn't come, I would miss something important, even without knowing what it was. And now, sitting here with you, discovering this absurd connection between our stories, I feel that instinct was right. The silence that followed was full of unspoken things. Augustus picked up the wine bottle from the floor next to the sofa and offered it to Marina. She accepted, drinking directly from the bottle instead of using a glass, in a gesture that surprised both of them with its informality. She returned the bottle, and Augustus did the same, sealing a silent complicity between them. "Tell me more about your mother," Augustus said softly. "What was she like?" Marina smiled, a sad smile but full of love. "She was strong, very strong. She worked her whole life, in jobs that barely paid enough to keep us going, but she never complained. At least not in front of me. She had a way of making any situation seem better than it was. When we only had rice and beans for dinner, she'd say it was a feast because we were together. When there wasn't money left for a birthday present, she invented games and stories that were worth more than any object." Marina's voice grew weaker, but she was sad too, I could tell. I saw that shadow in her eyes, that weight she tried to hide. She never talked much about my father, just said he wasn't ready to be a father and it was better that way. But I think she loved him very much. I think she carried that hurt until the end. She paused, taking a deep breath to control her emotion. When she got sick, everything happened very quickly. One moment she was there, making plans for the future, talking about things we would do together. The next, she was too frail to get out of bed. I tried to take care of her, but I was too young, too scared, too unprepared. Augustus instinctively reached out and touched Marina's shoulder in a gesture of comfort. She didn't pull away. "You did your best," he said firmly. "Sometimes the best we can do isn't enough to change the outcome, but it's still worth it. Your mother knew you loved her, that's what matters." Marina nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear that escaped. "Thank you," she whispered. Augustus removed his hand, but something had changed between them. The distance they maintained, that invisible barrier of self-preservation, had diminished a little more. They talked throughout the night, alternating between sad stories and memories that made them smile. Augustus told her how he learned to play the piano to please his mother, but then discovered he truly loved music. Marina spoke about her frustrated dream of studying literature and how she still read everything she could find in public libraries or cheap used bookstores. At one point, Augustus stood up and extended his hand to Marina. "Come, I want to show you something." She accepted his hand and allowed herself to be led out of the living room. They walked down the main corridor to a door Marina hadn't noticed before, partially hidden between two antique cabinets. Augustus opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down to what appeared to be a basement or cellar. "Don't worry, it's not scary," he said with a faint smile at Marina's hesitant expression. "It's my refuge." They descended the steps, and Marina was surprised to discover that the basement had been transformed into a complete music studio. The walls were covered with acoustic material. There was a magnificent grand piano in the center, shelves filled with sheet music, some smaller instruments carefully arranged, and an area with comfortable sofas for reading or resting. "Wow," was all Marina could say, slowly turning to absorb every detail. "This is incredible." Augustus walked to the piano and lightly ran his fingers over the keys without pressing, in an affectionate gesture. "This place is where I truly live. The rest of the house is just scenery. But here, I can be myself. Music never lies, never judges, never asks for anything in return. It just exists." He sat on the piano bench and looked at Marina. "You said you like music. Can I play something for you?" Marina nodded, feeling suddenly shy. She went to the sofa and sat down, hugging a cushion to her chest. Augustus closed his eyes for a moment, as if deciding what to play, and then began. The notes flowed from his fingers with a delicacy that contrasted with the contained personality he normally displayed. It was a melancholic but beautiful melody that seemed to tell a story without words. Marina vaguely recognized it as Chopin, but wasn't sure. She just let herself be carried away, feeling how the music filled every empty space in that environment and within her. She closed her eyes, and when the last note sounded, there was a moment of absolute silence where neither of them moved. "That was beautiful," Marina said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Augustus opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression Marina couldn't fully decipher. There was gratitude there, but also something deeper, more complex. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I played for someone. I forgot how different it is when there are ears truly listening, and not just silent walls reflecting the sound back." Marina got up from the sofa and walked to the piano, lightly running her fingers over the polished wood. "My mother would have loved this place," she said thoughtfully. "She never learned to play any instrument, but she loved music. She used to hum while doing chores around the house. She had a beautiful, soft voice. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, she would sing to me, old songs her mother had taught her." She smiled sadly. "I miss those songs." Augustus observed Marina attentively, noticing how her vulnerability was becoming increasingly exposed, as if that night had created a safe space where both could lower their defenses without fear of being hurt. "Do you sing?" he asked. Marina laughed, shaking her head. "Not well. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I sing to myself. It's comforting in a way. It makes the loneliness feel less oppressive." Augustus got up from the bench and walked to one of the bookshelves, searching for something. He returned with a folder full of handwritten sheet music. "These are my compositions," he explained, opening the folder for Marina to see. "Nothing professional, just experiments, attempts to translate feelings into notes. Most remained incomplete. I'd start with enthusiasm, but lose momentum halfway through." Marina picked up one of the scores, turning it delicately. On some there were notes in the margins, scribbled words that suggested unfinished lyrics. One in particular caught her attention. It was a melody that seemed simple, but the notes suggested a deep emotional complexity. In the upper margin, Augustus had written, "For those left behind." Below, there were a few started but unfinished verses, words that suggested loss, solitude, and a search for meaning that never completed itself. "Can I write on this one?" Marina asked suddenly, surprising herself with the audacity. Augustus blinked, equally surprised. "You write?" Marina shrugged. "I write some things sometimes, nothing serious. Just thoughts that don't fit in my head and need to get out, somehow. But looking at this, I feel like I can finish what you started, if you let me." Augustus hesitated only for a second before nodding. "Please, it would be an honor." He found a pen and handed it to Marina, who sat on the floor leaning against the wall, with the sheet music resting on her legs. She stayed like that for long minutes, just looking at the paper, reading and rereading Augustus's unfinished verses. Then, slowly, she began to write. Augustus did not look over her shoulder. Instead, he returned to the piano and played softly, improvising melodies that would not interfere with Marina's concentration. Time passed strangely in that isolated space, where there were no windows to show if it was still night or if dawn had already broken. Marina wrote, paused, thought, wrote more. She scribbled some words and replaced them with others. Augustus played, paused, started again. Finally, Marina stood up and walked to the piano. "I'm finished," she said, extending the sheet music to Augustus. He took it carefully, as if it were something precious, and began to read. As his eyes scanned the words Marina had added, his expression changed. His mouth opened slightly, his eyes widened, and something deeply moved crossed his face. Marina's words perfectly completed what he had started, but went beyond. She had transformed his melancholy into something that contained not only pain, but also hope. It spoke of improbable encounters, of bridges built between lost souls, of the courage to lower defenses even when everything insisted it was dangerous. "Marina," he said, his voice hoarse, This is exactly what I always wanted to say but never could. How did you do it?" She smiled shyly. "I don't know. The words just came. It's as if I was writing not just to complete your music, but to say something we both needed to hear." Augustus placed the sheet music on the piano stand and began to play. This time, as he played, he read the new verses aloud, transforming them into a song. His voice was deep and slightly husky, not perfectly in tune but filled with genuine emotion. Marina listened with teary eyes, recognizing in the words she had written a portrait of that impossible night, of that encounter that shouldn't have happened but was happening, changing them both in ways they couldn't yet fully comprehend. When the music ended, neither of them said anything for a long moment. They just looked at each other, recognizing in the other something that went beyond words or logical explanations. It was a deep, almost ancestral recognition, as if they were two halves that had been separated for a long time and were finally finding their way back to each other. It was Marina who broke the silence. "What time is it?" Augustus looked at the wall clock. "Almost 6 in the morning. We stayed up all night." There was astonishment in his voice, but also a quiet satisfaction. It had been years since he had spent an entire night awake, not from insomnia or anguish, but from genuine companionship. "We should get some sleep," Marina said, though there was no conviction in her words. The truth was, she didn't want that moment to end. She didn't want to go back to the cold, lonely room. She didn't want to close her eyes and risk waking up to find that it had all been an elaborate dream. Augustus seemed to feel the same. "Or we could watch the sunrise," he suggested. "There's a balcony on the 3rd floor with a view of the mountains. It's one of the few places where I can still feel something akin to peace." They went up together, passing through the ground floor, where Mrs. Eleanor was already beginning to prepare breakfast, ascending the main staircase, and then a second, narrower staircase leading to the 3rd floor. The balcony was wide, protected by a glass roof that allowed them to see the sky, with comfortable chairs and a small coffee table. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind clean, damp air. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon, tinging the clouds with pink and orange. They sat side by side, with blankets Augustus had taken from a nearby closet, and remained there in contemplative silence. Marina felt tiredness beginning to weigh on her eyelids, but she resisted. She didn't want to miss a second of it. Augustus seemed to feel the same, fighting to keep his eyes open, absorbing every detail of that dawn that seemed different from all others. "Thank you for staying," Augustus said suddenly, without taking his eyes off the horizon. "I know the situation was strange, that you didn't expect any of this when you picked up that invitation, but having you here changed something in me. I can't explain exactly what, but I can feel it. It's as if a door that had been locked for years has finally opened a little." Marina turned her face to look at him. "I feel that too, and I don't know if it scares me or relieves me. I've spent so long building walls, keeping my distance, protecting myself, that I forgot what it's like to let someone truly get close. But with you, it doesn't feel scary. It feels natural, it feels right." Augustus finally met her gaze, and in that moment, as the sun rose behind the mountains and bathed Aspen in golden light, both understood that something fundamental had changed. It wasn't just a night of conversation and coincidental discoveries. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that could either save them or destroy them, depending on how much courage they had to continue lowering their defenses and face the unknown together. But neither of them knew yet that this fragile peace was about to be tested in a way they could not foresee. Breakfast was served on the glass-enclosed veranda overlooking the back gardens. Mrs. Eleanor had prepared a lavish spread: fresh, still warm breads, homemade cakes, artisanal jams, perfectly cut fruits, natural juices, aromatic coffee, and hot chocolate. Marina ate with genuine appetite, savoring each bite as if it were the first and last time she would taste something so delicious. Augustus watched with a discreet smile, noticing how she delighted in things that for him had always been too common to merit attention. "You're watching me," Marina said, without looking up from her plate, but with a playful smile on her lips. Augustus chuckled softly. "Sorry, it's just been a very long time since I shared a meal with someone who truly appreciates food. I spent years eating alone, turning every meal into a mechanical task. Seeing you like this reminds me that food can also be pleasure." Marina finally looked at him, delicately wiping her mouth with her napkin. "For someone who never had much, every good meal is a gift. I learned not to waste, to savor every bite, to be grateful for what's on the plate. My mother taught me that. She said gratitude turns anything common into something special." Augustus was quiet for a moment, absorbing those words. "Your mother was wise. I think I spent my whole life looking at what I had without ever truly seeing. Money, properties, expensive objects. All of that loses meaning when you realize you can't buy what truly matters." He took a sip of coffee. "Connection, presence, moments like this. These things are priceless because they are invaluable." Marina felt her chest tighten with his sincerity. There was something deeply touching in seeing that powerful and controlled man allow himself to be vulnerable. "You're not what I expected," she said honestly. "When I arrived here yesterday, I thought I'd find someone arrogant, distant, perhaps even a little cruel. But you're kind. Wounded, yes, but kind. And I think that matters more than anything else." Before Augustus could respond, Mr. Damien appeared at the veranda door with a worried expression. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize for interrupting, but Dr. Wallace is here. He says he needs to speak with you urgently." Augustus frowned, surprised. "Wallace? Here? On Christmas Day?" He looked at Marina with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "He's the family lawyer. I have no idea what he could want at this hour." He rose from the table, excusing himself. To Marina, "It shouldn't take long. Please make yourself at home. Explore the house if you like, read a book from the library, or just rest. When I return, we can decide what to do with the rest of the day." There was an implicit promise in those words, the suggestion that the day would be theirs without interruptions, without the outside world invading the safe space they had built during the night. Marina nodded, watching Augustus leave with firm steps towards the office where the lawyer awaited. She remained alone on the veranda for a few minutes, finishing her coffee and looking out at the garden bathed in morning light. Everything seemed too unreal. Less than 24 hours ago, she was in her tiny apartment, alone and resigned to spending another meaningless Christmas. And now she was here, in a magnificent mansion, after spending the entire night talking with a man who somehow understood every unspoken word, every silence laden with meaning. She decided to explore the house a little more, as Augustus had suggested. She walked through the corridors, admiring the paintings and antiques that decorated each space. She found the library Augustus had mentioned, an enormous room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with books of all kinds. There was a wooden ladder that slid on rails to reach the highest volumes, comfortable armchairs strategically placed, and a large reading table in the center. Marina picked up a few books at random, leafing through them with reverence, smelling the characteristic scent of old paper. She was so engrossed that she didn't realize how much time had passed until she heard agitated voices coming from the corridor. They weren't shouts, but there was a palpable tension in their tone. She put the book back on the shelf and walked silently towards the sound, driven by a curiosity that mixed concern and apprehension. The voices were coming from the office, whose door was ajar. "You're not understanding the gravity of the situation, Augustus," said an unfamiliar male voice, formal and impatient. "The clause is crystal clear. Your uncle was extremely specific. If you spend Christmas in affectionate company, you automatically lose the right to the additional $5 million from the trust. I'm not here to judge his decisions. I'm here to ensure you are aware of the consequences." "I know perfectly well what that will says," Augustus responded, his voice controlled, but laden with tension. "I've read that damned clause dozens of times. My uncle had a sadistic sense of humor. He wanted to punish me even after he was gone, to ensure I remained as lonely as he was. It's cruelty disguised as a moral test." Marina felt her blood run cold. Affectionate company. The words echoed in her mind with overwhelming weight. She was the affectionate company. Her presence there was costing Augustus a fortune. 5 million. An amount she couldn't even fully comprehend. A value that for her represented entire lifetimes of work. Cruelty or not, it's what's written, the lawyer continued. And last night Mr. Damien called me to inform me there was a guest in the house. I thought it best to come personally to remind you of the implications. There's still time. If she leaves before noon today, technically you can still argue it was merely temporary hospitality, not affectionate company per se. But if she stays, especially if you stay together today, there will be no way to defend your position against the other heirs who are eyeing that money. There was a heavy silence. Marina held her breath, pressed against the wall next to the door, every muscle in her body tense. Mr. Damien had called the lawyer. Why? And why hadn't Augustus mentioned anything about this clause during the entire night they spent talking? Wallace, Augustus said finally, his voice low but firm. I appreciate your concern, but I don't need you to remind me what's at stake. I know perfectly well. And frankly, I'm starting to question if it's worth it. My uncle spent his entire life accumulating money and died alone, embittered, with no one who truly cared for him. Is that what he wanted for me? To perpetuate the same cycle of loneliness and misery? I'm not paid to philosophize about his intentions, the lawyer responded coldly. I'm paid to ensure the will is executed as written, and I'm telling you, as your lawyer, that you're about to lose $5 million if you don't make a decision now. Marina couldn't listen anymore. She moved away from the door with silent steps, her heart pounding erratically, her mind spiraling. 5 million. Because of her. She, who had nothing, who lived on the bare minimum, who could barely pay her rent at the end of the month, was there, being the reason Augustus was losing a fortune. Guilt swallowed her like a wave, heavy and suffocating. She returned to the room assigned to her, closed the door, and leaned against it, breathing with difficulty. She looked around, at all that luxury that now seemed accusatory. She didn't belong in that place, she didn't belong in that life. She had been naive, foolish, to allow herself to believe that connection with Augustus was real, that there were no complications, that they could simply exist in that protected space without the outside world interfering. But the world always interfered. There was always a price, always consequences, and she couldn't be the reason Augustus lost all that. It didn't matter how much the previous night had meant to her. It didn't matter the connection they felt. It didn't matter that for the first time in years she had felt seen, understood, accepted. None of that justified costing him $5 million. With trembling hands, Marina began to gather her things. She took off the silk pajamas and put on her own simple clothes, folded the pajamas carefully and left them on the bed. She picked up her old bag and checked if she had enough money for the bus ride back. She quickly looked at herself in the mirror, seeing the reflection of a young woman with tired eyes and a broken heart, and allowed herself a second of weakness, where she wished things could be different. But they weren't, and she needed to do the right thing, even if the right thing tore apart something inside her that had barely begun to heal. She left the room silently, descending the staircase carefully to avoid making noise. She could still hear voices coming from the office, the lawyer still arguing, Augustus still resisting. She didn't want him to see her leave. It would be easier that way, cleaner, he would understand later. Or perhaps not. But at least he wouldn't have lost 5 million because of her. She was almost at the main door when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Mr. Damien, who was watching her with an expression that mixed surprise and understanding. "Are you leaving, miss?" His voice was soft, without judgment. Marina nodded, unable to trust her own voice. Mr. Damien approached slowly. "You heard the conversation in the office." It wasn't a question. Marina bit her lower lip, fighting back the tears that threatened to overflow. "I can't stay. I can't be the reason he loses all that. It's not fair." Mr. Damien sighed deeply. "Miss Marina, with all due respect, I don't think you truly understand what's at stake here. $5 million, Marina said, her voice choked. "I understand perfectly. It's a fortune. It's more money than I'll see in my entire life. And he'll lose all of it if I stay. How can I live with that on my conscience?" Mr. Damien shook his head slowly. It's not about the money, miss, it never was. Mr. Sterling has enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of his life, even without those 5 million. What's at stake is much greater than money. Marina frowned, confused. Mr. Damien continued, his voice laden with painful wisdom. His uncle, Mr. Marcus, was a bitter man who wanted to ensure Augustus followed in his footsteps. That clause wasn't made to protect him. It was made to imprison him, to ensure he remained alone, distrustful, incapable of connecting with other people. It was the last form of control, the last chain keeping Augustus tied to the same lonely fate that destroyed his uncle. Tears finally rolled down Marina's face. But I can't be the reason he loses so much money. I'm not worth that. I'm not worth 5 million. I'm worth nothing close to that. Her voice broke on the last sentence, revealing all the pain and sense of inadequacy she had always carried. Mr. Damien stepped forward and placed his hands on Marina's shoulders with paternal gentleness. Miss, the question isn't how much you're worth in money. The question is how much the possibility of being happy is worth, how much it's worth to have someone to share life with, how much it's worth not to die alone and embittered like Mr. Marcus died. His eyes were moist. I've served this family for 30 years. I saw Mr. Sterling grow up. I saw him become a young man full of dreams, and then I saw those dreams die one by one, until all that was left was an empty man performing meaningless rituals. Last night, for the first time in a decade, I saw something different in his eyes. I saw hope. Marina sobbed, covering her face with her hands. But he knows me. I barely know him. How can it be worth losing so much for someone he met less than a day ago? Mr. Damien smiled sadly. Sometimes one day is enough to change an entire life, and sometimes we know someone for years without ever truly knowing them. Time doesn't measure the depth of a connection. At that moment, the office door burst open and Augustus came out, his face etched with tension. His eyes immediately found Marina standing in the hall, her bag in her hands, and tears on her face. Comprehension and pain simultaneously crossed his expression. "You heard," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Marina couldn't respond. She just nodded, words caught in her throat. Augustus walked to her with quick steps, stopping at a respectful distance, but with his eyes fixed on hers. "How long were you listening?" Marina wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Enough. Enough to understand that I need to leave. Now. Before it's too late." "No," Augustus said with surprising firmness. "No, you're not leaving." Marina shook her head vehemently. "You don't understand. 5 million, Augustus, $5 million. I can't be the reason." "You lose that. I'm not worth that. No one is worth that." Her voice rose in volume, laden with desperation. "I'm nobody. I work in a bakery. I live in a miserable apartment. I have nothing to offer that justifies you losing a fortune." Augustus took another step towards her, his jaw tight, his eyes shining with an intensity Marina had never seen before. "You don't understand, Marina. You truly don't. Those 5 million mean nothing. They're just numbers in a bank account, just more zeros adding up to other zeros that already exist. But what happened last night? What happened this morning? That means everything. It means that maybe I can still be more than a bitter man waiting to die alone." Marina sobbed again. "But you barely know me. How can you be sure? What if tomorrow you realize I wasn't what you thought? What if I disappoint you? What if it's not enough, and then you'll have lost everything for nothing?" Augustus closed the distance between them, gently taking Marina's face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Then I will have lost 5 million but gained the chance to find out, and that is already worth more than all the money in the world." The words were so sincere, so charged with raw emotion, that Marina felt her defenses crumble. But the guilt still weighed, overwhelming. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't carry this weight. I can't be the reason you lose so much. I'm not strong enough for that." She tried to pull away, but Augustus held her face more firmly, though still gently. "Then let me be strong for both of us," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "All my life I made the right choices according to others. I protected the estate, maintained appearances, followed the rules my uncle set. And where did that lead me? To an empty mansion, to solitary dinners, to endless nights where the silence is so heavy it feels suffocating. For the first time, I want to make the wrong choice. I want to take a risk. I want to believe there's something more important than money. The lawyer appeared at the office door, observing the scene with ill-disguised disapproval. Augustus, you need to think rationally about this. You can't throw away a fortune for an emotional impulse. Tomorrow, when the dust settles, you'll regret. Telos, Augustus turned his head towards the lawyer, but did not release Marina. Wallace, with all due respect, leave. This is not a decision that needs your approval or your opinion. It's my life, my money, my choice. The lawyer scoffed, incredulous. You're making a terrible mistake. The other heirs will contest. They'll claim you deliberately violated the terms of the will. There will be lawsuits, hearings, a long and exhausting legal battle. Augustus finally released Marina and turned fully to the lawyer, his posture erect and his voice firm. Then let them contest. Let them sue. I'll be ready to face whatever comes. But I will no longer live by the rules of a man who died bitter and alone. I will not perpetuate the same cycle of misery he worked so hard to impose on me. He gestured towards the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more important matters to attend to. You may leave. The lawyer hesitated, clearly struggling between professional duty and personal frustration, but finally nodded stiffly and left, hitting his leather briefcase against his leg in a gesture of contained irritation. When they were alone, except for Mr. Damien, who remained discreetly, nearby Marina felt her legs weaken. She sat on the staircase step, letting her bag fall beside her. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice weak. "You'll regret it." Augustus sat beside her, so close that their shoulders touched. "Perhaps, but it will be my mistake to make, my regret to carry, not yours." Marina turned her face to look at him, seeing the determination etched in every feature. "Why? Why are you doing this? For me? Someone you met yesterday?" Augustus took her hand, intertwining their fingers carefully, as if holding something infinitely precious and fragile. "Because yesterday, when you arrived here, something inside me that had been dead for a long time woke up. Because all night talking with you, I felt that finally there was someone who saw me not as the rich heir, not as the important surname, but as just Augustus, a wounded man trying to find meaning." He took a deep breath before continuing. "And because when I saw you with your bag in hand, ready to leave, to sacrifice what we felt because of money, I realized that you are exactly the kind of person worth risking everything for. Someone who cares more about my well-being than my fortune, someone who was willing to leave to protect me even if it hurt her." Marina felt new tears roll down, but now they were different. They weren't tears of guilt or despair, but of something much more complex and frightening. They were tears of recognition, of acceptance, of surrendering to a truth she tried to deny, but that was there, throbbing and undeniable between them. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed. "I don't know how to lower my defenses completely, how to trust, how to allow myself to believe this can work." Augustus squeezed her hand. "I don't either, but I think we can learn together, one day at a time, one step at a time." Marina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she faced. She could get up, grab her bag, leave that mansion, and go back to her small, safe life. Or she could stay, take a risk, allow herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something real there, something worth fighting for. She opened her eyes and looked at Mr. Damien, who was watching everything with a discreet smile and tears in his eyes. The old butler nodded encouragingly, as if he could read her thoughts and was telling her it was okay, that she could choose to stay, that she deserved this chance at happiness. She then looked at Augustus, at that man who was willing to lose a fortune just for the possibility of no longer being alone. "It's raining again," Marina said suddenly, pointing to the window where drops began to hit the glass. Augustus looked, confused by the change of subject. "It is." Marina slowly stood up, pulling Augustus with her. "Then I guess I can't leave. Now it would be dangerous. Slippery streets, poor visibility." There was the slightest hint of a smile on her lips, shy but genuine. Augustus understood, and his entire face lit up in a way that completely transformed him. He was no longer the tired, disillusioned man Marina had met yesterday. He was someone new, or perhaps an old self that had been buried under years of pain and cynicism. "It would be very dangerous," he agreed, his voice full of barely contained emotion. "You should wait for it to pass." "What if it doesn't pass?" Marina asked, now smiling openly. Through her tears. "What if it rains all day?" Augustus smiled too, a true smile that reached his eyes for the first time. "Then I guess you'll have to stay. For safety, of course." Mr. Damien cleared his throat discreetly, reminding them both of his presence. "If you'll excuse me, I'll ask Mrs. Eleanor to prepare lunch. I have a feeling it will be a special meal." As the butler walked away, leaving them alone in the hall, Augustus and Marina remained there, holding hands, looking at each other as if seeing for the first time. The decision was made. The path was chosen. And although they didn't know what the future held, although there would be legal battles ahead and countless uncertainties, at that moment they were sure of one thing: it would be worth it. Outside, the rain fell heavily, washing the world, preparing the ground for something new to grow. And inside the mansion, two wounded hearts began the slow and frightening process of allowing themselves to heal together. The days that followed that Christmas were unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Marina did not return to her apartment immediately. In fact, when Augustus suggested she stay a few more days, just to be sure that the decision they had made sense, she accepted with a mixture of relief and nervousness. Mr. Damien properly prepared the guest room, and Mrs. Eleanor seemed radiant to have someone new to care for, showering Marina with maternal attention she hadn't received in years. The routine that settled in was strange but comforting. They woke early, had breakfast together on the glass-enclosed veranda, talked about trivial and profound things with equal intensity. Augustus showed Marina every corner of the property, sharing stories from his childhood, pointing out places where he used to hide when he wanted to escape family expectations. Marina, in turn, spoke more about her mother, about the dreams she had as a young woman that life had slowly eroded. On the third day after Christmas, Marina needed to return to her apartment to get more clothes and sort out some practical matters. Augustus insisted on accompanying her, sending Joshua to drive while they sat in the back of the car. When they arrived in Marina's neighborhood, Augustus looked around with contained curiosity. It was a world completely different from his own. Narrow streets, simple houses, clustered together, children playing on the sidewalk, clothes hanging on improvised lines. But there was no judgment in his gaze, only genuine interest. Marina's apartment was exactly as she described it, tiny, with a bedroom barely big enough for a bed, a kitchen where two people couldn't fit at the same time, a cramped bathroom, and a small area that served as a living room. But it was clean, organized, with small touches that showed care despite the precariousness. Books piled in every corner, a plant on the windowsill that insisted on surviving, photos of her mother in simple frames, on an improvised shelf. Augustus entered slowly, absorbing every detail, and something changed in his expression. He saw there the reality of Marina's life, the stark contrast with the world of luxury he inhabited. And instead of increasing the distance between them, that somehow brought them even closer. Because Marina had built a dignified life with almost nothing, while he could barely find meaning having almost everything. "It's small," Marina said with a touch of defensiveness, gathering some clothes and putting them into an old backpack. "But it's mine. I pay for it with my work. No one gave it to me as a gift." Augustus walked to the window and looked down at the street. "It's honest," he said simply. "There's more life in these four walls than in my entire mansion." He turned to her. "You built this yourself, Marina. That's worth more than any inheritance." Marina stopped what she was doing and looked at him, feeling her chest tighten with the sincerity of those words. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if my life had been different. If my father had stayed, if my mother hadn't gotten sick, if I had had opportunities that other people have. But then I think that maybe everything had to be exactly as it was for me to get here, at this moment, with you." Augustus crossed the small space in 2 strides and pulled Marina into a hug. It wasn't a rehearsed or calculated gesture. It was pure impulse, a pure need to offer comfort and receive comfort at the same time. Marina let herself be enveloped, fitting against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, feeling for the first time in a long time that perhaps she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they returned to the mansion, there was an unusual commotion. 2 cars were parked at the entrance, and agitated voices came from inside the house. Augustus frowned, recognizing one of the vehicles. "My cousins," he said with a tired sigh. "It's already started." They entered together and were immediately confronted by 3 people in the hall. 2 men in their 40s, dressed in expensive suits and expressions of indignation, and a slightly younger woman with excessive jewelry and a sharp gaze that swept Marina from head to toe with barely disguised contempt. "Augustus," said one of the men, his voice authoritative and irritated, "we need to talk now in private." His gaze shifted to Marina with a clear intent to exclude her. Augustus, however, held Marina's hand firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of her." Marina stays. The other man scoffed. "So it's true. You're really willing to throw away 5 million for some nobody you barely know." Marina felt the insult like a slap, but before she could react, Augustus stepped forward, releasing her hand only to position himself between her and his cousins. "Watch your words, Leonard," he said in a dangerously low voice. "Marina is my guest and deserves respect. If you can't show the slightest civility, I suggest you leave my property." The woman let out a sharp, unpleasant laugh. "Your property, for now, Augustus. But when you lose the 5 million from the trust, you'll need all the money you can get. And we're here to ensure that money is distributed to those who truly deserve it. To the family." The 3rd cousin, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke in a tone that tried to be reasonable but failed miserably. "Augustus, we understand. You're lonely, vulnerable. This young woman took advantage of the situation, but there's still time to correct this. Send her away. Claim it was a temporary error in judgment, and we can work together to ensure the will is executed as your uncle wished." Augustus laughed, but it was a humorless laugh, laden with decades of family resentment finally surfacing. "Do you really think I don't see through this charade? You don't care what my uncle wanted. You care about the 5 million you think you can claim if I lose my right to them. It's always been about money with this family. Always." Leonard took a threatening step towards Augustus. "You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. This woman came out of nowhere, accepted a suspicious invitation, and in less than 2 days has already convinced you to give up a fortune. If this isn't a scam, I don't know what is." Marina could no longer remain silent. She broke free from behind Augustus and confronted Leonard directly, her voice trembling with contained anger but firm. "I didn't know about any will when I accepted that invitation. I didn't know there was money at stake. When I found out, I tried to leave. I was the one who wanted to leave to protect Augustus from this situation. So don't accuse me of being opportunistic when all I did was try to do the right thing." The woman rolled her eyes theatrically. "What a touching story. I bet you rehearsed it well. But we're not fools, dear. We know exactly your type. Opportunists who play the victim to gain the trust of lonely men with money." Before the argument could escalate further, Mr. Damien appeared with 2 security guards Augustus discreetly employed for the property. "Mr. Sterling, were the cousins leaving?" There was an polite but non-negotiable firmness in his voice. Augustus nodded. "Yes, Damien, they were. Now." Leonard pointed an accusing finger at Augustus. "This isn't over. We'll contest it in court. We'll prove that you deliberately violated the terms of the will. And when all is said and done, you won't have just lost the 5 million. You'll have lost your reputation too." The 3 cousins left amidst veiled threats and contemptuous glances, leaving behind a heavy tension in the air. When they were alone, Marina turned to Augustus, her face pale. "Will they really?" "So?" Augustus ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. "Probably. But let them. I have competent lawyers and resources to defend myself. They're just furious because they saw an opportunity to grab a piece of the inheritance and now realize it won't be as easy as they thought." Marina sat on the staircase step, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to deep emotional exhaustion. "I hate this. I hate being the cause of all this confusion in your life. I hate that your family sees me as an opportunist." Augustus sat beside her, pulling her close. "My family has always needed someone to blame for their own failures. Before it was me for not marrying someone of suitable background. Now it's you for existing. No matter what we do, there will always be criticism. The question is whether we will let their opinions determine our choices." In the following days, the tension gradually subsided as they resumed the routine they had established. Augustus began working remotely from home, managing his investments and businesses through video calls and emails, but always making sure to include Marina in mealtimes and leisure moments. She, in turn, called the bakery and asked for a few days off, using accumulated vacation time she had never taken. One afternoon, while exploring the library together, Augustus pulled an old album from a high shelf. "Want to see something embarrassing?" he asked with a mischievous smile. Marina snuggled beside him on the sofa as he opened the album, revealing faded photos of his childhood. There was a little boy too serious for his age, always in formal clothes, posing stiffly next to equally serious adults. But there were also some different photos where he smiled openly, usually when he was alone or with the grandmother he had mentioned before. "You were adorable," Marina said, delicately touching a photo where young Augustus held a dog. "What happened to him?" Augustus looked at the photo with a mixture of affection and sadness. "Rex. He was my best friend for 5 years. When he passed, I asked my parents for another dog, but my father said animals were unnecessary distractions. He said I needed to focus on my studies, my responsibilities, on preparing to take over the family business. I never had another pet." Marina turned the page and found photos of elaborate parties with dozens of elegant people, lavish tables, excessive decorations. In all of them, little Augustus appeared in the corner, observing from afar, always with that same serious expression. "You look so lonely in these photos," Marina said softly, "even surrounded by so many people." Augustus slowly closed the album. "I was, always have been, until you showed up." The raw sincerity of those words made Marina turn to face him. They were so close that she could see the small details of his face, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years of tension, the shadow of stubble that gave a touch of humanity to his aristocratic perfection. Without much thought, without calculating, she leaned in and gently touched his lips with hers. It was a shy, questioning kiss, laden with all the uncertainty and hope they felt. Augustus remained motionless for a second, surprised, but then responded, deepening the kiss with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of the emotion they both felt. When they separated, they stayed like that. Breaths mingled, foreheads touching, trying to process what that moment meant. "Sorry," Marina said, suddenly conscious of her boldness. "I shouldn't have—" Augustus placed a finger over her lips, silencing her. "Don't apologize, never apologize for that." His eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "Do you feel it too? This sensation that we are on the verge of something immense, something that can save us or destroy us?" Marina nodded, unable to trust her voice. Augustus continued, his voice hoarse. "I'm scared, Marina. Scared of messing this up, of not being enough, of you eventually realizing you deserve someone better, someone who doesn't carry so much baggage and old wounds. But at the same time, for the first time in decades, I have something stronger than fear. I have hope." Marina touched his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her completely. "I'm scared too. I spend entire nights awake wondering when you'll realize I'm just an ordinary girl with nothing special to offer. Wondering when reality will hit and you'll realize you gave up 5 million for someone who isn't worth a fraction of that. But then I look at you, and I see that we are the same. Two wounded human beings trying to find light in each other's darkness. They stayed like that for a long time, simply holding each other, allowing the silence to speak the things that words couldn't fully capture. It was a moment of mutual surrender, of acceptance, of yielding to the vulnerability that so frightened them both. That night, They dined alone in the music studio, Mrs. Eleanor having prepared a simple but delicious meal that she left on a tray for them. Augustus played the piano while they ate, improvising melodies that reflected the mood of each moment. Marina hummed softly, still shy about her voice, but encouraged by his encouraging gaze. "You know what I never asked you," Augustus said suddenly, stopping playing. "What you really want out of life? If you could choose anything without financial or practical limitations, what would you do?" Marina thought for a moment, chewing slowly. "I think I'd like to study. Literature, maybe education. I always wanted to be a teacher, to help other young people going through the same difficulties I did, to be the person I needed when I was younger." She paused. "And you?" Augustus looked at the piano, running his fingers over the keys without producing sound. "Honestly, I think I'd like to do something that truly mattered. All these years, managing investments, multiplying money that was already excessive, never brought any real satisfaction. I'd like to use the resources I have to create real change in people's lives. I don't know exactly how, but I'd like to leave a mark that was more than just numbers in bank accounts." Marina smiled. "Maybe we can do that together. You with the resources, me with the will. It could be something beautiful." Augustus took her hand across the piano lid. "It could be our mission, our way of transforming all this pain into something productive." The days continued to pass, each bringing new discoveries and small moments of connection that accumulated into something increasingly solid. Marina got to know Mrs. Eleanor better, who shared stories from Augustus's childhood, revealing a side of him that he himself seemed to have forgotten. Joshua showed her the garden, teaching her the names of the plants and flowers, talking about how each one had its season and its purpose, but not everything was tranquil. There were nights when Marina woke up sweating, tormented by nightmares where she was back in her tiny apartment alone, discovering that everything had been a cruel dream. And there were moments when Augustus withdrew into himself, consumed by old doubts that resurfaced without warning, questioning whether he deserved that chance at happiness. It was during one of these difficult moments, almost 2 weeks after Christmas, that everything came to a head. Augustus was in his office dealing with paperwork related to the lawsuit his cousins had indeed filed, and the tension was palpable. Marina knocked softly on the door, entering when he allowed. He was sitting behind the enormous desk, surrounded by documents, his face etched with stress. "You should rest," Marina said, approaching carefully. Augustus shook his head without looking up from the papers. "I need to resolve this. I need to ensure they don't get what they want." Marina pulled up a chair and sat in front of him, waiting patiently. Finally, Augustus put down his pen and looked at her, and there was such exhaustion in his eyes that Marina felt her heart clench. "Sometimes I wonder if I shouldn't just give in," he said, his voice tired. "Give them what they want. End all this. Go back to living in peace." Marina leaned forward. "Do you really believe that giving in would bring peace?" Augustus rubbed his face with his hands. "I don't know. I just know I'm tired of fighting. Tired of always having to defend my choices, justify my life, prove that I have the right to seek happiness." Marina stood up, walked around the desk and positioned herself behind him, placing her hands on his tense shoulders and gently beginning to massage them. "Then stop fighting alone," she said simply. "Let me carry some of that weight. I'm not just a spectator in this story, Augustus. I'm here, by your side, willing to face whatever comes. But you need to let me help. You need to trust that you won't push me away if you show me the most difficult parts of yourself." Augustus covered one of her hands with his own, squeezing tightly. "I'm so afraid of losing you," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize this is too heavy, too complicated, that it's not worth it. Everyone always leaves, Marina. Always. And I don't know if I would survive losing you too." Marina walked around the chair and knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "Then listen carefully to what I'm going to say and believe it because I won't repeat it 1,000 times. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, this is complicated. Yes, there are difficult moments. Yes, your family is a nightmare and there are lawsuits and problems ahead. But you know what else there is? There's you. There's this connection we've built. There's the possibility of something real and true, and that's worth every difficult moment." Her words struck something deep in Augustus, tearing down the last barrier he maintained. He pulled Marina into his arms with an urgency that bordered on desperation, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality, and perhaps she was. They stayed like that for an immeasurable time, just breathing together, allowing each other's presence to be enough. When they finally separated, Augustus discreetly wiped his eyes and smiled for the first time that night. "Thank you," he said simply. Marina returned the smile. "That's what I'm here for. Both of us, remember? Learning together, one day at a time." The next morning, Augustus woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He knew what he needed to do, not just regarding the lawsuit, but regarding the entire life he had led until then. It was time for real changes, not just superficial ones. It was time to honor the chance Marina had given him, the chance he had given himself, by choosing not to be alone. He called his lawyer, not Dr. Wallace, but another he trusted more, and instructed him to prepare documents. Then he sought Marina, who was in the library reading one of the books she had taken from the shelves. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "I want to show you something important." He led her back, to the office, where architectural plans and documents that Marina couldn't immediately decipher were spread across the desk. "What is all this?" Augustus took a deep breath before answering. "It's the beginning of our mission. Remember how we talked about using the resources I have to make a real difference? Well, I spent the night thinking, and I have an idea." He began to explain, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm Marina had never seen before. He wanted to transform part of the property into an educational center for low-income youth. Scholarships, tutoring, vocational courses, psychological support. A space where young people like Marina could have the opportunities life had denied them. And he wanted Marina to be involved from the beginning, helping to plan, execute, and shape that vision. "It's perfect," Marina said, tears streaming freely now, but they were tears of joy, of gratitude, of seeing something beautiful born from shared pain. "It's absolutely perfect." Augustus pulled her into a hug. "Then let's make it happen, together." And there, in that office that was once just a space of loneliness and empty obligations, they began to plan a future that was more than just survival. A future where the pain of the past transformed into purpose, where loneliness gave way to connection, where two wounded hearts learned that healing didn't mean forgetting, but rather transforming scars into wisdom to help others who were still bleeding. The lawsuit filed by the cousins would continue. The complications would not magically disappear. But now, for the first time, Augustus did not face everything alone, and Marina discovered that it was worth risking, that lowering defenses was not weakness but courage, that allowing oneself to be loved was as important as loving. Aspen was entering January, and with the new year came new possibilities. The mansion, once a mausoleum of painful memories, began to transform into a home, and two strangers who met on an improbable Christmas Eve were discovering that sometimes the most important encounters in life are those we never plan, that catch us off guard, and that change everything forever. January arrived, bringing with it unseasonably warm weather to Aspen, as if even the climate conspired to mark that period as one of transition and rebirth. The lawsuit filed by Augustus's cousins slowly progressed through the legal system, accumulating paperwork, postponed hearings, and increasingly convoluted arguments from both sides. But Augustus seemed less and less concerned with the legal outcome, and more focused on building something that truly mattered. The Educational Center project quickly took shape. Augustus hired architects, educators, and social workers to help with planning. Marina, despite lacking specific training, proved to be an essential collaborator, bringing the perspective of someone who had lived through the difficulties the project aimed to alleviate. Her suggestions were practical, born of real experience, and often pointed out flaws that more academic professionals couldn't see. One February morning, Marina woke with the strange feeling that something was different. She got up from the room she already considered hers, put on light clothing and went down for breakfast. She found Augustus on the glass-enclosed veranda, but he wasn't alone. Mr. Damien was there, as were Mrs. Eleanor and Joshua, all dressed with a care that suggested a special occasion. "What's going on?" Marina asked, looking from one to the other with curiosity. Augustus stood up, an enigmatic smile on his lips. "Today is an important day. I have something to do, and I'd like all of you to be present. You are my real family, the only one that truly matters." The declaration brought tears to Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, and even Joshua, usually stoic, seemed moved. After breakfast, everyone got into cars. Augustus drove his own vehicle, with Marina beside him, while the staff followed in another car right behind. The destination turned out to be a notary's office in downtown Aspen, an old building of classical architecture that exuded formality and tradition. Inside, Augustus's trusted lawyer and a notary public awaited with a stack of documents on the table. "Mr. Sterling," the notary said in a grave, professional voice, "are you sure about what you are about to do? It is an irreversible decision." Augustus looked at Marina, who was beside him with an expression of confusion and apprehension, not fully understanding what was happening. Then he looked at Mr. Damien, Mrs. Eleanor, and Joshua, who watched respectfully. Finally, he turned back to the notary with an unwavering certainty in his gaze. "I am absolutely sure. Proceed." The notary nodded and began to read the documents aloud. It was a formal and irrevocable renunciation of the will's clause that would guarantee him the additional $5 million from the trust. More than that, it was a public declaration that Augustus was giving up those funds by his own choice without coercion, and that he was allocating that amount not to the cousins who contested the will, but to an educational fund to be managed by a foundation created in his grandmother's name. Marina covered her mouth with her hands, tears instantly welling up. "Augustus, you don't have to do this," she whispered. He took her hand, squeezing gently. "Yes, I do. Not out of obligation, but because it's what I want to do. That money, as it was, only brought weight and painful expectations. Now it will help young people have chances they wouldn't otherwise have. It will make a real difference that is infinitely more valuable than numbers in a bank account." The notary continued reading, detailing how the $5 million would be used exclusively to fund scholarships, educational programs, and support for vulnerable youth. The foundation would be overseen by an independent board, ensuring the money was used according to the established purpose. At the end of the reading, Augustus signed each page with firm, decisive movements, without hesitation. When everything was concluded, the lawyer spoke. "Mr. Sterling, you know this means the end of your cousin's lawsuit. They will no longer have a legal basis to contest, as the money will no longer be available for dispute. But it also means that you are permanently giving up this sum. There's no turning back." Augustus smiled, and it was a smile of genuine peace. "I know. And it's exactly what I want." They left the notary's office into a sunny morning, and Marina was still processing what she had just witnessed. In the car, as Augustus drove back home, she finally found words. "You actually did it. You gave up $5 million. Augustus kept his eyes on the road, but his smile remained. "I didn't give it up. I transformed it. That money as it was only brought weight and painful expectations. Now it will help young people have chances they wouldn't otherwise have. It will make a real difference. That is infinitely more valuable than numbers in a bank account." Marina wiped away the tears that still fell. "Your grandmother would be proud." Augustus nodded, his voice choked. "I think so. She always said that a person's true worth isn't in what they accumulate, but in what they share. It took me 40 years to understand what she meant, but now I understand. Finally, I understand." In the following weeks, the news spread quickly through the social circles of Aspen and New York City. Some praised Augustus's action, seeing it as a noble and altruistic gesture. Others criticized it, saying it was madness to give up so much money. The cousins, discovering there was nothing left to dispute, withdrew their lawsuit with bitter defeat, making final accusations that no longer held force or relevance. But Augustus didn't care about external opinions. He was too busy building something real. Construction of the educational center began in March, transforming an entire wing of the property into classrooms, a library, a computer lab, common areas, and even a small multi-sport court. Marina plunged headfirst into the project, working alongside the hired educators to develop the curriculum and selection criteria for beneficiaries. It was during this intense period of work that Marina realized how much she had changed. She was no longer the insecure young woman who had accepted a mysterious invitation on Christmas Eve. She had discovered within herself a strength she didn't know she possessed, a capacity for leadership and a clarity of purpose that surprised her. And looking at Augustus, she saw the same transformation. The tired, bitter man she had known had given way to someone vibrant, passionate about a project, genuinely happy in a way that money had never been able to provide. In May, the center was almost ready. It had been decided that the inauguration would be in June, coinciding with the mid-year school holidays. Applications were opened for young people between 14 and 25, primarily from low-income families, and the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of candidates applied, each with stories that echoed Marina's, stories of potential stifled by lack of opportunity. The selection was a painful process, as it meant many would be left out, at least in that first phase. But Marina and Augustus promised to expand the program gradually as results emerged and more resources were mobilized. The foundation created with the $5 million from the will guaranteed financial sustainability for at least 10 years, enough time to establish the center as a benchmark and attract additional support. On Inauguration Day, the mansion was unrecognizable. The gate that had always remained closed was wide open, welcoming entire families who came to see the space. Colorful banners adorned the entrance, a small band played live music, and there were tables with food and drink for everyone. It wasn't ostentatious luxury, but genuine hospitality, an invitation for those people to feel like they truly belonged there. Augustus gave a brief speech, his voice firm but laden with emotion. For a long time I lived within these walls as a prisoner of my own loneliness and others' expectations. But someone very special taught me that walls can be torn down, that true connections are worth more than all the gold in the world, and that our greatest responsibility is to use what we have, to uplift those who are still struggling. This center is not charity. It is justice. It is giving talented young people the tools they deserve to build their own paths. And it is my way of honoring all the people who were left behind, who didn't have the chances that chance gave me by being born into an affluent family. He paused, looking for Marina in the crowd. She was there, talking with one of the selected young people, and when their eyes met, they exchanged a knowing smile that spoke of their entire shared journey. This project would not be possible without many people, Augustus continued, but especially without Marina Smith, who not only inspired me to do things differently, but who became the heart of this initiative. If there is hope in this place, it is because she brought it with her when she walked through that gate on a Christmas night, accepting an invitation that no one else had the courage to accept. The ovation was warm and sincere. Marina felt her face burn, unaccustomed to public attention, but allowed herself to absorb that moment of recognition. After the formalities, the celebration continued informally, with families exploring the space, children running through gardens that had once remained empty and silent, laughter echoing through walls that only knew the echo of solitary footsteps. At night, when everyone had left and the house returned to quietness, Augustus and Marina sat on the veranda where they had watched the sunrise months ago. It seemed years had passed since that dawn of shared discoveries and vulnerabilities. "I'm proud of you," Marina said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Of the man you allowed yourself to be." Augustus kissed the top of her head. "I only allowed myself because you showed me it was possible. You saved me, Marina, in a way that even the best doctors or therapists couldn't. You saved me just by being yourself, honest and brave enough to see me as I really was and not run away." Marina raised her face to look at him. "We saved each other. That's the truth. Two wounded people who found each other at the right time and decided to heal together." The following months brought more transformations. The educational center grew, expanded, and became a regional benchmark. Hundreds of young people passed through it, each carrying not only knowledge but the certainty that someone believed in them. Marina completed college, then pursued a specialization, officially becoming the pedagogical director of the center. Augustus continued managing the resources that ensured the project's sustainability, but now with a purpose that went far beyond multiplying numbers. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, transformed into a meeting point. Each Christmas, the tradition established by Mr. Damien with those 50 invitations was honored in an expanded way. The house opened its doors for a community dinner, where anyone was welcome, regardless of class or origin. Tables were set for hundreds, food was plentiful but without ostentation, and the atmosphere was one of genuine welcome. Many of those who came were alone. Some were current or former students of the center. Others were simply people who had heard about that strange and beautiful tradition of a mansion that refused isolation. And each year at the top of the Christmas tree, the restored bell shone. It became a symbol not only for Augustus and Marina, but for everyone who knew their story. A symbol that what seems irremediably broken can find a way to shine again. A symbol that loneliness does not have to be destiny. A symbol that a single yes, a single courageous decision to embrace the unknown can change not just one life, but radiate transformation to hundreds of others. Mr. Damien, who had planted the seed of it all with his 50 invitations, watched each Christmas with tears of gratitude in his eyes. He saw the employer who had once been just a sad man in an empty mansion now surrounded by life, purpose, and love. He saw Marina, the only one who had accepted the invitation, blossomed into a strong and radiant woman who touched lives daily. And he knew that his decision to disobey orders and send those invitations had been the best thing he had done in his 30 years of service. Mrs. Eleanor and Joshua remained in the house, no longer merely employees, but as essential parts of that family that had formed in unconventional ways. They saw children being born, children of former students of the center baptized in the house, shared celebrations and difficulties, life flowing with all its complexity and beauty. And when people asked Augustus if he regretted giving up the 5 million, he always answered the same thing. I didn't give up anything, I transformed it. That money bought something far more valuable than any material thing could. It bought purpose. It bought connection. It bought the chance to make a real difference in the lives of deserving people, and it freed me from chains I didn't even realize I was carrying. So no, I don't regret it for a second. Marina, in turn, when asked what had made her accept that mysterious invitation on that Christmas Eve, always smiled before answering. I think a part of me knew that if I didn't try, if I didn't take the risk, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. And I was tired of living in fear, tired of just surviving. I wanted to truly live. And that invitation, however strange it was, felt like a door opening. So I walked through. And on the other side, I found not just a man who needed company, but a partner, a purpose and a life worth living. The story of Augustus and Marina became known in Aspen not as a fairy tale where the rich prince saves the poor commoner, but as a real story of two wounded people who saved each other. A story about the courage to lower defenses, the wisdom to transform pain into purpose, and the beauty of allowing true love into one's life, even when everything within us insists it's too risky. And every time someone hung an ornament on a Christmas tree, especially the old glass bells that could sometimes still be found in antique shops, Marina and Augustus remembered where they began. Two lonely people on a cold December night, a dinner prepared for 50 but shared by only 2, of words spoken and unspoken, of vulnerabilities exposed and accepted, of a connection that defied logic but made all the sense in the world. And so the mansion that was once a mausoleum of solitude transformed into a beacon of hope. The walls that witnessed decades of isolation now echoed with laughter, conversations, music, life. And at the center of it all, 2 hearts that had been broken learned day after day, year after year, that healing doesn't mean forgetting the pain, but transforming it into wisdom. That loving is not losing oneself, but finding oneself. That family is not just blood, but choice. And that sometimes the greatest courage is not in protecting the heart, but in giving it to someone who promises to care for it with the same tenderness with which they care for their own. The story ends there, on a Christmas Eve many years after that first one, in the same room where it all began, with the same illuminated tree, with the same bell at the top. But everything is different, because where before there were two lonely strangers, now there was a family. Where before there was silence, now there was music. Where before there was darkness, now there was light. And where before there was only the fragile hope that the world could be different, now there was the lived certainty that it is worth believing. It is worth risking. It is worth saying yes to the unknown, when the heart insists there is something there that needs to be discovered. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Augustus and Marina has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of two lonely souls who found and transformed each other, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment touched you the most. Was it their first meeting on Christmas Eve, the moment Augustus decided to give up the 5 million, or the final scene with the restored bell shining at the top of the tree? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which remind us that it's never too late to start over, and that true love is worth every sacrifice. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that life can surprise, that better days will come, and that sometimes all it takes is saying yes to the unknown for everything to change. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with more stories that will move, inspire, and touch your heart. See you soon.